Have you ever wondered where the fine line is between a regular vacation and a one-way ticket? There are places in the world that are not shown in tourist brochures. Places where your GPS is useless and your passport is just a piece of paper with no guarantees. Today, we will go on a journey through the most dangerous places on the planet in 2026. From streets where traffic lights are traps for kidnappers, to entire states governed from prison cells. We take a look into Heart of Darkness and see digital dystopias where a tattoo can make you disappear forever. Fasten seat belts. We begin our list of the 21 most dangerous places on Earth, where it is better not to go, even in a bulletproof vest. Imagine a place where the boundaries between the state and street crime have completely blurred. Welcome to Haiti. Today, it's not just a poor country. It's a territory where gangs control over 80% of the capital, Port-au-Prince. There are no dangerous areas here. Every square meter is dangerous. Gangs like the G9 have united into powerful coalitions that wield more sophisticated weapons than the local police. Imagine leaving the airport and your life instantly turning into a lottery. Kidnapping has become the main source of income for local gangs. They take everyone: doctors, priests, humanitarian workers, and, of course, the occasional tourist. Ransom bills are issued instantly, and the conditions of captivity are mind-boggling. The government has been virtually paralyzed since the assassination of the president in 2021, and since then, the institutions of power have crumbled like a house of cards. Gangs have set up checkpoints in some areas of the city. Driving down the main street requires paying a tax to an armed teenager who can hardly read but knows how to pull a trigger. Even the delivery of food and water to hospitals is controlled by criminal authorities. If you find yourself there without an armored motorcade and a private army, your chances of a successful outcome are slim to none. This is a place where chaos isn't temporary, but a new normal, impossible to adapt to. But if street chaos reigns in Haiti, in the next country you'll encounter danger lurking behind a mask of exoticism and primitive traditions. If gang chaos in Haiti frightens you, then in Papua New Guinea you'll encounter something more primal and unpredictable. The country's capital, Port Moresby, is regularly ranked among the 5 most dangerous cities in the world, and that's no exaggeration. Here, the rascals rule. They're not just criminals, they're a whole caste of young men for whom violence is the only means of self-affirmation. For them, a machete-wielding robbery is just another Tuesday, and the brutality of gang initiation often includes rituals unthinkable to a civilized person. Imagine that in this city, there's no such thing as a safe walk. Even during daylight hours, you can only travel in a closed car with the doors locked, or, better yet, with armed guards. The fences here aren't just high, they're topped with electrified barbed wire and sharp blades. Hesitate for a second at a traffic light, and your window could be shattered by a heavy rock, and the next moment, a huge sugarcane knife will be at your throat. The police here are often so incompetent or so corrupt that they simply refuse to go to certain areas. But the worst horrors arise when urban gang warfare intersects with ancient tribal warfare. A conflict sparked by the theft of a pig in a remote village can erupt into a bloody massacre right on the streets of the capital. Here, human life is valued less than a pair of sneakers or a mobile phone. This is a place where modern technology coexists with the most brutal manifestations of the Stone Age. However, while machetes clash in the jungles of Papua, half a world away, an entire country is slowly drowning in blood due to ideologies that are incompatible. South Sudan is officially considered the youngest country on the planet, but in its short history, it has witnessed more horrors than other countries have endured in centuries. It is a territory stuck in an endless loop of civil war and ethnic cleansing. Here, almost every family has a gun, and children often learn to hold a machine gun before they learn to hold a spoon. Imagine landscapes that could be the setting for a post-apocalyptic movie: burnt-out villages, abandoned humanitarian centers, and endless columns of refugees. In this country, the conflict between government forces and the opposition has long since devolved into a chaotic massacre of everyone against everyone. The laws of war don't apply here, human rights are not respected, and international organizations recognize South Sudan as one of the most dangerous places to work. Kidnappings, sexual violence, and extrajudicial killings occur daily. Even if you come here with good intentions, you automatically become a resource. For the warring parties, you are either a hostage for ransom or a source of valuable equipment. Infrastructure here is virtually non-existent. Roads turn into swamps during the rainy season, and in dry areas, you'll find checkpoints manned by drunken soldiers or mercenaries who decide whether you live or die based on your skin color or accent. Hunger is used as a weapon here, and entire city blocks are dying. This is a land where hope is the scarcest commodity, and the sky above is often obscured by smoke from fires. South Sudan is a brutal reminder of what happens when humanity gives way to the lust for power and hunger. Then on the coast of another country, danger comes from the sea, where the law of the jungle has taken on a new, pirate form, Somalia. The word has long been synonymous with absolute anarchy. Imagine a coastline thousands of kilometers long, without a single functioning lighthouse, and the only real power is waging warlords and clan chieftains. The capital, Mogadishu, for years held the title of the most dangerous city on earth. Here, the sounds of gunfire are perceived as background noise, and the sight of pickup trucks with heavy machine guns mounted in the back, the so-called technicals, is the only familiar form of transportation. For a foreigner, a trip to Somalia is not a journey, but a special operation. Even the short drive from the airport to the fortified green zone requires an escort of at least 2 vehicles with armed guards. Al-Shabaab controls vast territories and regularly carries out terrorist attacks, reducing hotels and government buildings to rubble. But the most frightening thing isn't even this. It's the lack of a level playing field here. You might be stopped by a patrol that looks like an official army, only to discover 5 minutes later that it's simply an armed gang looking to make a buck by renting your life. The situation is no better on the coast. The Somali pirates, trumpeted around the world, haven't disappeared. They've simply transformed. They now comprise entire syndicates that can hijack a ship or a group of people and hold them for years in inhumane conditions, awaiting millions of dollars in ransom. In Somalia, law exists only on paper, long since burned. It's a place where your safety depends solely on how many guns are pointed in the direction of your potential enemy. But if the Somali coastline is frightening in its savagery, the next country will show you how a wealthy nation with vast gold and oil reserves can turn into a criminal hellhole due to inflation and corruption. Venezuela is a living example of how a once prosperous country, awash in oil wealth, can overnight become the setting for a survival thriller. The country's capital, Caracas, has long contested the title of the most dangerous city in the world. It's not just the crime rate that's high here. Crime has become the only viable social mobility. Due to monstrous inflation and shortages of everything from medicine to toilet paper, human life has been devalued to the cost of a pack of pasta or a tank of gas. Imagine that in Caracas, there's an unspoken rule. No one stops at a red light after sunset. Stopping means guaranteed armed robbery. In the slums, called barrios, the police are afraid to appear even during the day. These neighborhoods are ruled by pranas, criminal bosses who command entire armies from prison. These gangs are armed not only with machine guns but also with grenades, which they unhesitatingly use right on busy streets. For any visitor, threats come from everywhere. Express kidnappings are a regular occurrence here. You're grabbed right as you're leaving a restaurant, driven to the nearest ATM, your account is entered, and, if you're lucky, you're dumped somewhere on the outskirts. But the worst thing is the corruption. You never know who's in front of you, a genuine police officer looking to help, or a uniformed thug looking for his next victim. In Venezuela, you feel like you're in a cage, even if you're surrounded by beautiful beaches and mountains. It's a golden land drowning in its own rage and despair. But if in Venezuela danger smells of gunpowder and gasoline, then in the next country you will find yourself in a land where the very soil is saturated with the spirit of holy war, and a foreigner in the eyes of the locals is an eternal enemy. Afghanistan is a place where time seems frozen in the Middle Ages, spiced with modern weaponry. Since the withdrawal of international forces in 2021, the country has become an isolated fortress controlled by a radical movement. For Westerners, and indeed for any foreigner, this is a land of absolute risk. Here, you're not just a tourist, you're a political asset, a symbol of a hostile ideology, or a potential hostage for international bargaining. Imagine the streets of Kabul, dust, chaos, and patrols of men in traditional dress carrying American M4 rifles abandoned by the retreating army. Sharia law is interpreted with the strictest severity here, and the slightest error in behavior, clothing, or careless word can result in immediate arrest or public punishment. Women are effectively banned from public spaces, and foreign men find it extremely difficult to explain the purpose of their visit to the suspicious, bearded men at the numerous checkpoints. The danger here is multi-layered. Beyond the official authorities, cells of even more radical groups, such as ISIS-Khorasan, operate in the shadows, regularly carrying out bloody terrorist attacks in mosques and markets. You never know which parked car will explode into a fireball, or which passerby is hiding a suicide belt under their clothes. Infrastructure has been destroyed by decades of war, healthcare is virtually non-existent, and any attempt to photograph anything wrong can result in accusations of espionage. Afghanistan today is a land that has slammed its doors on the world, leaving behind only fanaticism and scorched mountains. But if in the Afghan mountains danger stems from ideology, then in the next country, once the cradle of civilization, death literally falls from the sky and hides under every stone. Yemen is a place where the tales of 8001 Nights collide with the nightmare of modern warfare. Once the incense route, the country today resembles a patchwork quilt torn apart by the Houthis, government forces, separatists, and Al-Qaeda cells. In the capital, Sana'a, ancient clay skyscrapers, listed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, stand side by side with bomb craters. The sky here is never peaceful. If fighter jets aren't thundering, drones are buzzing, and the ground is literally strewn with mines. Imagine walking through a market where, instead of fruit, the stalls are littered with mountains of cart, a soft drug chewed by almost the entire male population to escape the horrors of reality. In Yemen, weapons are part of the national costume. Every man carries a traditional Jambia dagger in his belt and a battered Kalashnikov over his shoulder. There's no single center of power here. At one checkpoint, you might be let through for smiling, and at the next, arrested simply because they don't like your passport. The worst thing about Yemen isn't just the bullets, but also the invisible killers, cholera and widespread famine. The infrastructure is so devastated that clean water is worth more than gold. For foreigners, it's a trap. Airports are often closed due to shelling, and land borders are controlled by gangs who view any outsider as a lottery ticket worth hundreds of thousands of dollars in ransom. This is a country of incredible beauty, slowly committing collective suicide before the eyes of the entire world. But while Yemen is a war of all against all, in the next African Republic, the state exists only within the confines of the presidential palace, and everything else is the domain of armed groups. The Central African Republic, CAR, is a country where statehood has become a transparent phantom. Imagine a territory the size of France, where the authority of the legitimate government ends precisely where the suburbs of the capital, Bangui, end. The rest is a patchwork quilt, divided among dozens of armed groups that change names and alliances more often than the weather. Here, the very concept of civilian is erased. If you don't hold a machine gun, you're either a victim or a refugee. Life in the car today is about surviving in conditions of permanent chaos. Even in 2026, despite the presence of peacekeepers and foreign military specialists, vast territories remain a grey zone. There are no roads here, only directions where checkpoints await you every 10 kilometers. And at each checkpoint, people man them for whom your passport is just an incomprehensible piece of paper, and your belongings are legal loot. Conflicts flare up here over everything: access to gold mines, disputes between herders and farmers, or simply ancient feuds between communities. For a foreigner, traveling outside the capital is essentially a voluntary surrender. Kidnappings, attacks on humanitarian convoys, and complete impunity have made this country a black hole on the world map. There's no healthcare, no communications, and the only law is the law of the land. You can wake up in a relatively peaceful village, and by lunchtime it's transformed into a battlefield where no one cares who you are or where you're from. The car is a place where humanity seems to have regressed to the Dark Ages, armed with modern technologies of destruction. But if in the Central African Republic chaos is fragmented into small gangs, then in the next country, Located in the very heart of Africa, you'll find a heart of darkness, where conflict has lasted for decades and claimed millions of lives, almost unnoticed by the rest of the world. The Democratic Republic of the Congo, DRC, is a place often called the heart of darkness, and unfortunately, in 2026, this description is more relevant than ever. Imagine a territory the size of Western Europe, where the central government in Kinshasa is just a dot on the map, with no real authority over the eastern provinces. Here, in the dense jungle and mineral-rich Kivu Hills, a war rages that the world prefers to ignore. This isn't just a conflict, it's chaos fueled by a struggle for resources. The cobalt, gold, and coltan found in your smartphone are paid for here with human lives. More than 120 armed groups currently operate in the DRC. The most powerful of them, M23, uses modern technology, including attack drones, turning cities like Goma into veritable traps for civilians. Imagine being in a city hemmed in by an erupting volcano on one side and by advance units of rebels and mercenaries on the other. Death here can come from anywhere, from a mortar shell, from a bandit's machete, or from an invisible disease. Huge refugee camps, where people live for years, become targets for attacks, and humanitarian convoys are robbed before they even reach those in need. For any foreigner, Eastern Congo is a completely taboo zone. Insurance doesn't work here, and consulates are powerless. You enter a world where the only value is what can be extracted from the earth or taken from the weak. Even working in official mines is deadly due to constant cave-ins and the lack of basic safety precautions. The DRC is an endless tragedy of an incredibly rich land, where people have become hostages of the global economy and local cruelty. But if in Congo, danger lurks in the forests and mines, then in the next country, once the cradle of history, you'll see the ruins of an entire civilization transformed into an endless minefield. Syria is a place where human history literally crumbles to dust under tank treads and airstrikes. Damascus and Aleppo were once the pearls of the East, centers of trade and culture, but today much of the country resembles the set of an apocalypse film. Imagine entire blocks of multi-story buildings reduced to concrete skeletons, with the wind blowing through the empty window sockets. Here, the war hasn't ended. It's simply entered a state of smoldering chaos, where every inch of land could belong to anyone: government forces, pro-Turkish groups, Kurdish militias, or sleeper cells of radicals. For anyone who ventures here without an official invitation and an armed entourage, Syria is a giant trap. The worst threat here is invisible. It's the millions of unexploded ordnance and anti-personnel mines that are literally sown in fields, gardens, and even residential buildings. You could simply step into an abandoned store, and it could be the last thing you do. The country's healthcare system is in tatters. Electricity is on a scheduling schedule for a couple of hours a day, and the economy is so devastated that a pack of cigarettes can be worth more than a human life. Danger also comes from the numerous intelligence agencies and paramilitary forces. Checkpoints are at every turn, and if your face or documents arouse the slightest suspicion, you could disappear into one of the notorious prisons without the right to a phone call or a lawyer. Here, foreigners are often viewed as spies or valuable commodities. Syria today is the wounded body of an ancient civilization, where under every layer of sand lies either an unexploded bomb or someone's untold tragedy. But if ruins and mines in Syria frighten you, then in the next country, lost in the sands of the Sahara, danger comes from the endless desert, ruled by merciless fanatics. Mali is a land where the endless sands of the Sahara conceal not only the ancient secrets of Timbuktu, but also the deadly threat posed by radical groups. In 2026, the country is effectively split into two. While a semblance of urban life still lingers in the south, in Bamako, the north and center have become a free hunting zone for jihadists and mercenaries. Imagine driving along a national highway and suddenly being blocked by people on motorcycles with their faces covered. Here, this isn't a movie scene, but an everyday reality where an ambush can lurk behind every dune. In Mali, kidnapping foreigners is a well-oiled business with multi-million-dollar turnover. Groups linked to Al-Qaeda and ISIS have been holding hostages for years in inhumane conditions deep in the desert. The state is represented only by a few military garrisons, which themselves are constantly under attack. In 2025, Attacks on humanitarian missions and civilians increased by 40%, and infrastructure such as bridges and communication towers is systematically destroyed. Even if you're a seasoned traveler, Mali is a gold mine for those who recognize no law but force and fanaticism. The most dangerous thing is unpredictability. You can plan a route through safe towns like Segu, but the situation changes in a matter of hours. Villages that were peaceful yesterday can be under radical control today. There's no room for diplomacy, and your passport offers no protection. In fact, it makes you a priority target. Mali today is the blazing horizon of the Sahel, where heat and sand consume hopes of peace, leaving only the smell of gunpowder. But while in Mali the danger comes from the desert, in the neighboring country it has flared up like a wildfire, turning the once tranquil savannas into a new flashpoint on the map of global chaos. Burkina Faso is a country whose name translates as homeland of honest people, but today honesty is powerless in the face of total fear. Just 10 years ago, it was a peaceful place where people went for safaris and music, but now the country has become one of the most dangerous places in the Sahel. Imagine that almost 30% of the country's territory is officially outside government control. These are dead zones where the only law is the will of radical groups who don't just fight, but methodically destroy everything resembling peaceful life. Life here has become an endless series of checkpoints and fear. Imagine leaving the capital, Ouagadougou, and 40 minutes later, normal roads end, and with them, your safety. Attacks on peaceful villages occur here with alarming regularity. Militants storm into markets or schools, opening fire to kill. In 2024 to 2025, the death toll was in the thousands, and over 2 million people were forced to abandon their homes and flee into thin air. Here, even working in the fields becomes a mortal risk. You can be killed simply for being from the wrong tribe or praying the wrong way. What's especially terrifying is that in Burkina Faso, violence has become two-sided. On one side are the terrorists, on the other, the militias and the army, which human rights activists in 2026 are increasingly accusing of brutal purges. A foreigner here is not a guest, but a walking ATM or a political hostage. If you are kidnapped in these dusty savannas, there will be no one to look for you. The consulates are closed, and the police won't risk traveling to areas ruled by jihadists. This is a place where hope for rebirth is buried under layers of sand and bullet casings. But if in Burkina Faso danger smells of gunpowder and dust, then in the next country, located in the very heart of Central America, chaos is clad in tattoos and speaks the language of ruthless cartels. Honduras is a country that has been trapped for decades by two of the world's most ruthless gangs, MS-13 and Barrio 18. Here, the word Mara, gang, inspires more fear than the name of any politician. In 2026, despite the authorities' attempts to impose a state of emergency following the example of their neighbors, the level of violence remains off the charts. Imagine walking down the streets of San Pedro Sula, a city repeatedly recognized as the murder capital. Here, even storefronts are protected by steel bars, and at the entrance to an ordinary pharmacy stands a guard with a shotgun, his finger always on the trigger. In this country, there's a concept called impuesto de guerra, a war tax. It's a common form of extortion, but on a nationwide scale. Everyone pays, from the owner of a major business to the grandmother selling pupuses on the corner. If you refuse to pay, the sentence is immediate and cannot be appealed. Foreigners are in danger even in taxes. Express kidnappings have become commonplace. They pick you up right from the airport, take you to ATMs, and then sometimes abandon you in a remote area where the police are afraid to appear even in daylight. The Department of Gracias a Dios occupies a special place in this hell. This is a wild jungle on the border, where there are no roads, no communication, and the only rulers are the drug cartels. Planes carrying cargo from Colombia land here, and a human life in these parts isn't worth even the price of a bullet. If you accidentally see something you shouldn't, you simply have no chance of leaving these forests alive. Honduras is a place where natural beauty contrasts with extreme cruelty, and fear has become a key element of the national character. But if in Honduras you're frightened by tattooed gunmen in the slums, then on the next paradise island, danger hides behind the mask of a carefree resort, where the murder rate breaks all world records. Trinidad and Tobago is a place where the tourist brochure's image of white beaches and steel drum shatters into the harsh reality of crime. In 2026, the murder rate here reached such levels that the tiny island nation was ranked among the most dangerous zones in the world. Imagine that behind the colonial architecture of Port-au, Spain, a real war for turf is raging. Here, the interests of local gangs that control drug trafficking from South America to the United States and Europe clash. Danger on the islands is explosive and unpredictable. You can be dining in a fashionable neighborhood, and 5 minutes later find yourself in the epicenter of a shootout because the wrong car drove by. Kidnapping has become a professional sport here. Not only wealthy businessmen are kidnapped, but also their relatives, children, and even bystanders. Police often acknowledge that entire districts of the capital, such as Lavental, are no-go zones, where patrols enter only in armored vehicles and with a special forces escort. For foreigners, the risk increases exponentially if they venture off the beaten path. Robberies with firearms on beaches and in national parks have become a sad norm. It's not just wallets that are stolen. The violence is often gratuitous and brutal. Local gangs like Zessa and Trinidad romanticize crime in their songs, drawing ever younger men into the chaos. Trinidad is a paradise that has become a battlefield, where the sound of the surf is increasingly drowned out by gunfire, and the police are powerless against the might of drug syndicates. But while danger still lurks behind the palm trees on these islands, in the next South American country it literally bursts forth from the dense jungle, where gold and oil dictate their own rules. Guyana is a country that, in 2026, finds itself at the center of a geopolitical storm that has transformed the quiet outskirts of South America into a high-risk zone. Imagine dense, impenetrable jungles concealing not only incredible biodiversity but also vast deposits of oil and gold. It is precisely these riches that have become the country's curse. A territorial dispute with Venezuela over the Essequibo region, which comprises 2/3 of Guyana's territory, has escalated to the limit. Here, borders are not just lines on a map, but troop deployment sites, where any spark can ignite a full-scale conflict. For anyone who ventures into the interior, the hinterland, remote areas, becomes a lawless zone. There is virtually no police presence, and communications are spotty. Illegal gold miners and gangs rule these wild forests, tolerating no witnesses to their activities. In the capital, Georgetown, the situation is no less tense. Armed robberies and assaults remain extremely high. Criminals often work in groups, stalking their victims in advance, and foreigners are walking bags of money in their eyes. Even Guyana's coast is no longer a safe place due to the threat of piracy. But the most depressing thing is the constant expectation of an escalation of conflict at the border. Life here operates in a state of heightened vigilance, where the facade of an economic boom fueled by oil production conceals the fragility of a state caught between the ambitions of its neighbors and internal criminal chaos. This is a place where nature still exudes majesty, but man has done everything to transform this paradise into a no-go zone. But while in Guyana the danger is only just brewing in the jungle, in the next African country it has long been put on an industrial scale, and kidnapping has become a national sport there. Nigeria is a land of contrasts, where the ultramodern business centers of Lagos coexist with areas where human life has become a bargaining chip in the hands of professional kidnappers. In 2026, kidnapping for ransom has become a veritable criminal industry here, with billions of naira in revenue. Imagine driving along a busy highway and suddenly being blocked by armed men. These aren't just robbers, they're the managers of your future captivity, assessing your worth even before you get out of the car. Almost everything is dangerous here, from the northern states, where Boko Haram and ISIS are rampant, to the central regions, where gangs of bandits, as they're called here, attack schools and entire villages. Imagine the fear of parents sending their child off to college, not knowing if they'll ever see them again. For a foreigner, Nigeria is a minefield of risks. Traveling around the country requires more than just an escort. It requires detailed route planning, taking into account the latest reports of attacks. Even in the capital, Abuja, the risk of being kidnapped from your home or hotel remains alarmingly high. The economic crisis only adds fuel to the fire. When people have nothing to eat, a Kalashnikov assault rifle becomes a means of survival. The police are often overwhelmed or corrupt, and the judicial system is too slow. In Nigeria, you constantly feel someone's judgmental gaze, and that gaze is rarely friendly. This is a land of immense opportunity, suffocated by fear and organized crime, where every step beyond the threshold of a fortified home is a challenge to fate. But while you can be kidnapped for money in Nigeria, in the next country, lost in the mountains of Southeast Asia, you can disappear simply for the wrong look at the men in uniform waging war against their own people. Myanmar is a country where ancient pagodas and breathtaking landscapes today conceal one of the darkest realities of our time. In 2026, the country remains divided after a military coup, and what was once an exotic travel destination has become a territory of violent conflict. Imagine entering a world where the internet can be shut down at any moment, and nighttime curfews are in effect on city streets. Here, the military junta wages war not only against rebels on the outskirts, but also against its own population. But the most frightening zone of Myanmar is the Golden Triangle on the border with Thailand and Laos. In 2026, this territory has completely transformed into a state within a state, where no international laws apply. A new, extremely dangerous industry has flourished here, giant cyber fraud centers. Thousands of foreigners are lured here with promises of high-paying jobs in IT, only to find themselves in virtual slavery upon arrival. They are held in closed areas surrounded by barbed wire and armed guards, forced under torture to deceive people all over the world. Once you're caught in one of these camps, legal escape is virtually impossible. In the rest of the country, danger comes from the unpredictability of military patrols. Any foreigner is considered suspicious. You can be arrested for taking a photo of an ordinary building, which the military considers a strategic asset, or for having the wrong apps on your phone. Political arrests have become widespread, and legal protection for foreigners is non-existent. Myanmar today is a beautiful cage, where around every corner you might find either a checkpoint with nervous soldiers or a trap set by modern-day slave traders. But if Myanmar's military dictatorship and cyber slavery frighten you, then in the next country, chaos has descended instantly, turning peaceful cities into testing grounds for heavy artillery. Sudan is a place where, in 2026, the very concept of security has been wiped off the face of the earth by heavy artillery and airstrikes. Imagine the prosperous neighborhoods of Khartoum, reduced to scorched skeletons in just a couple of years. The civil war between the regular army and the Rapid Intervention Force, RSF, has turned the country into the world's largest humanitarian disaster. There are no conventional front lines here. Fights are fought for every intersection, every hospital, turning the lives of millions into an endless nightmare in the crossfire. For a foreigner, trying to enter Sudan today is practically a guaranteed one-way ticket. The capital's airport is regularly targeted by drone strikes, and roads are blocked by dozens of unmanned checkpoints. At each one, armed men with no unified command await you. Your passport, car, or even just your water supply make you a target. It's not just looting here. There's a struggle for resources amid a total famine, officially recognized by international organizations. The worst is happening in the Darfur region, where the violence has reached the level of ethnic cleansing. Villages are being burned to the ground, and communication with the outside world is cut off for months. If you find yourself at the epicenter of these events, there's no help to be found. Humanitarian missions themselves are constantly under fire, and embassies have been evacuated. Sudan is a land where state institutions have crumbled, leaving behind only the clanking of tracks and the silence of abandoned cities. It's a place where the future has been sacrificed to the ambitions of two generals, and an entire nation has been held hostage in their deadly game. But if in Sudan, cities were reduced to rubble by one major war, then in the next country, you'll see an entire state fragmented into hundreds of tiny fragments, each with its own army. Libya is a country that, after 2011, became a gigantic patchwork quilt, where every city could be considered a separate state with its own army, flags, and laws. In 2026, there's still no centralized government. The country is split between governments in Tripoli and Benghazi, and vast swaths of desert are controlled by local tribes or armed groups. Imagine crossing an invisible border between two regions, and suddenly your pass issued in one office becomes grounds for arrest in another. For a foreigner, Libya is a zone of extreme risk. There's no traditional police force to turn to for help. If you have a conflict with one of the local militia, you'll find yourself alone against people who recognize only the force of arms. Kidnappings for ransom or political reasons occur here regularly. Even if you arrive as part of an organized group, you are under constant surveillance by intelligence agencies on both sides, who perceive espionage everywhere. Unexploded ordnance and mines, which litter the suburbs of major cities, pose a particular danger. Economic chaos and the devaluation of the dinar have led to crime becoming the only way for many to feed their families. In Libya, you can experience the hospitality of the locals, but this hospitality exists in the shadow of machine gun towers and the constant expectation of a new outbreak of war. This is a land with a glorious past that has struggled to find a path to a peaceful future, remaining hostage to internal strife and foreign interests. But while chaos in Libya has lingered for years, in the next country it arrives suddenly, turning one of the most stable and developed corners of the region into an arena for bloody drug cartel wars. Ecuador, a country that just a few years ago was considered a safe haven for retirees and tourists, has become one of Latin America's hottest hotspots in 2026. This is a clear example of how quickly international drug cartels can destabilize an entire country. Today, Ecuador is in a state of internal armed conflict. Imagine if, in Guayaquil or Esmeraldas, the sounds of explosions and gunfire became as commonplace as the ocean, and a curfew was the only way to contain the chaos on the streets. The danger here has reached unprecedented levels. The country's prisons have become fortresses run by gangs dictating their will to the government. Mass riots, hostage takings broadcast live on television, and car bombs have become tools of intimidation. For foreigners, risk is everywhere, from express kidnappings to armed attacks in tourist areas. The Chineros and Lobos cartels, supported by Mexican syndicates, are waging a war for control of ports, turning peaceful cities into logistical hubs for cocaine trafficking. In 2026, even the capital, Quito, is no longer a safe haven. Attacks on restaurants and shopping malls, political assassinations, and widespread extortion have created an atmosphere of total mistrust. Ecuador is a country desperately fighting for its survival, where every roadblock can be either government or criminal, and the line between the two is becoming increasingly blurred. But while the state in Ecuador still tries to resist, in the next country, located in the Caribbean, authority is virtually non-existent, and cities are ruled by coalitions of armed groups. El Salvador, in 2026, represents one of the strangest and most terrifying social experiments in the world. Just a few years ago, it was officially the murder capital of the world, where the MS-13 and Barrio 18 gangs controlled every street. Today, the streets of San Salvador seem unusually quiet, but this silence comes at a very high price. State of emergency. Imagine a country where, in 2026, citizens' constitutional rights are suspended. The government has incarcerated over 2% of the country's adult population in gigantic megaprisons. Here, you can be arrested simply for a suspicious tattoo or an anonymous tip from a neighbor, and disappear into concrete dungeons without the right to a lawyer or contact with your family. Digital control and Bitcoin. El Salvador became the first country to implement cryptocurrency as its official currency, creating the perfect breeding ground for total digital surveillance. In 2026, your every move, purchase, and movement is recorded by the system. To a foreigner, it looks like a futuristic dystopia. Modern terminals and clean streets surround you, but a clammy fear hangs in the air. Hidden threat. Danger has changed its face here. Where once you feared a gangster's bullet, now you fear the system. Police patrols wield unlimited power, and prisons are so overcrowded that any mistake can turn a tourist into a gang suspect. El Salvador today is a facade of security, behind which lies the iron fist of a dictatorship. It's a place where crime has been suppressed at the cost of absolute freedom, and no one knows what will happen when this cauldron of popular discontent and judicial arbitrariness explodes from within. It was a journey through chaos, gunpowder, and human cruelty. The world of 2026 turned out to be far more fragile than we'd usually imagine. Which of these stories struck you the most? What's scarier? Absolute chaos, like in Haiti, or total control under fire, like in El Salvador? Tell me in the comments which of these countries you wouldn't visit even for $1 million. I'm very interested in your opinion. And if this episode gave you a new perspective on security in our world, please like and subscribe. Here we talk about things others prefer to keep quiet about. See you in the next episode.